If you want to work in contracts, SaaS, procurement, privacy, or in legal sales interface, one of the most important skills you can develop is not just knowing the law, it is knowing how to review a contract in a way that protects the company without unnecessarily slowing down the business. Because in real life, that is the job. The legal function is not there to decorate the process, it is not there to recite legal concepts in a vacuum, and it is not there to become the department that says no to everything. A strong business lawyer, commercial counsel, or sales-facing legal partner is someone who can rate risk clearly, rank it intelligently, communicate it simply, and help the company move forward with control. So in this video, I want to answer a very practical question. How do you actually review a contract like a business lawyer? Not like a student trying to impress a professor, not like someone who wants to mark up every line just to prove they are useful, but like someone whose job is to protect the company while still helping close the deal. The first thing to understand is this: a contract review is not a vocabulary exercise. It is not a ritual. It is not about changing words for the pleasure of changing words. A contract review is a business risk analysis. When a contract lands on your desk, your real question is not, is every sentence perfect? Your real questions are, what is this deal? What is the company trying to achieve? What could go wrong? What matters most here? And which risks are acceptable, negotiable, or unacceptable? That changes everything. Because a good legal review starts with context, analytic. Before looking at close number, you'll need to understand the commercial reality. Is this a small customer or a strategic one? Is this a low-value pilot or a long-term enterprise agreement? It's your company providing software, services, data processing, or a combination of all of three. Is the sales team under end of quarter pressure? Is there a real competitor in the deal? Is the other party using its own paper because it has more leverage? Without that context, legal review becomes mechanical, and mechanical review often produces bad lawyering, because it treats every deal as if it carried the same risk profile, but they do not. A 10,000 euro low risk engagement and a multi-year strategic SaaS agreement with data exposure do not deserve the same level of concern, escalation, and resistance. So step 1 is always understand the deal before touching the document. Then comes the second principle. Not all clauses matter equally. This is one of the biggest mistakes young lawyers make. They spend too much energy on secondary wording and not enough on the clauses that can really damage the company. A smart contract review is based on hierarchy. You need to know where the real risk lives. In most commercial contracts, the core areas usually include scope, payment, liability, indemnities, termination, intellectual property, confidentiality, data protection, security commitments, and governing law or dispute resolution. That does not mean everything else is irrelevant. It means some clauses are more likely than others to create financial, operational, regulatory, or reputational exposure. For example, if a limitation of liability clause is badly drafted, the company may take unlimited downside for relatively limited commercial upside. That is not a stylistic issue. That is a structural issue. If the termination clause locks your company into a bad relationship with no clean exit, that is not just uncomfortable, it may become operationally expensive. If the privacy language creates commitments the project or operations team cannot actually meet, that is not just a legal issue, that becomes a delivery issue, a trust issue, and potentially a regulatory issue. So, when I read a contract, I do not ask myself only whether I understand the clause. I ask, what is this clause doing economically, operationally, and strategically? That is how legal review becomes business lawyering. The third principle is that contract review is not about eliminating all risk. It is about allocating risk consciously. This is critical because companies do business by taking risk. No contract is risk-free. No serious legal professional should create the illusion that perfect safety is available. What matters is whether the company is taking the right risk, for the right reason, with the right visibility. That means your role is often to distinguish between three categories. First, acceptable risk. These are points the company can live with. Maybe the wording is not ideal, but the practical exposure is limited or manageable. Second, negotiable risk. These are points that should be improved if possible, but where compromise is available. This is often where business-minded lowering matter cost the most. You do not need to die on every hill. You need to know which hills matter. Third, unacceptable risk. These are the points where signing as drafted will expose the company in a way that is disproportionate, unmanageable, or inconsistent with internal policy, a legal obligation, or operational reality. This framework is powerful because it helps you communicate clearly with sales, procurement, founders, or management. Instead of dumping 20 comments into a red line and disappearing, you can say, here are the 2 points I can live with. Here are the 4 I want to improve. And here are the 2 I would not recommend accepting unless leadership makes an informed decision. That is a much more mature legal posture. It is structured, useful, and commercially intelligent. Now, let us talk about one of the most important skills in this role, reading the clause behind the clause. What do I mean by that? I mean, the legal rules often hide operational assumptions. A contract may say the vendor will comply with industry standard security measures. That sounds reassuring, but what does it actually mean inside the company? Who defines the standard? What technical controls are already in place? What has the security team actually validated? Would the product team be comfortable with that promise being interpreted aggressively? Or take a clause saying services will be performed in a timely and professional manner. Fine, but is that harmless boilerplate, or does it create a vague standard that could later support a claim? What are the service levels elsewhere in the contract? Are they online? Or consider a customer request for broad indemnification. Legal language may present it as a normal market protection, but in practice, are they asking your company to insure risk that it cannot control? This is where strong legal professionals become valuable. They understand that contracts are not just text. They are promises made by a real team with real limitations. Which means a good contract review must always ask, can the company actually do what this clause says? A clause is dangerous not only when it's aggressive, but it is dangerous when it is disconnected from the reality. That is why the best legal people do not work in isolation. They speak to sales, security, product, finance, procurement, and operations. Because legal quality depends on business truth. The fourth principle is about communication. You can be technically right and still be ineffective. This happens all the time. A lawyer sees a bad clause, writes a long abstract comment and believes the work is done. But the sales team is lost, the business team is frustrated, and the negotiation stalls. That is not enough. If you operate at the sales legal interface, your job is not just to identify issues, it is to translate them. For example, instead of saying, "This indemnity is overly broad and commercially unreasonable," you might say, "This clause makes us responsible for categories of risk we do not fully control. If a dispute arises, our downside can become much bigger than the revenue of the deal. We should narrow it to hyper-infringement and our direct breaches." And that is clearer. It explains the why. It helps non-lawyers understand the business logic. Or instead of telling sales, "No, we cannot accept this," you say, "We can probably move on this point, but not in its current form. Here is a safer fallback that still keeps negotiation moving." That changes your image completely. You stop looking like the blocker, you start looking like a problem solver. And this matters because perception matters in legal teams, especially for someone who wants to become commercial counsel, business counsel, or a legal partner to revenue teams with the law. The companies that value legal most are often the companies where legal understands timing, leverage, operational constraints, and commercial psychology. Now, let me give you a very simple mental model. When reviewing a contract, ask these 5 questions. First, what are we promising? Second, what are we getting in return? Third, what happens if things go wrong? Fourth, who carries the risk? Fifth, can the business actually perform what legal is agreeing to? If you ask these 5 questions consistently, your contract reviews will become sharper immediately, because you stop reading passively and start reading structurally. And finally, let us address something important. Being business-minded does not mean being weak on risk. It does not mean accepting everything in the name of speed. And it definitely does not mean helping close bad deals at any cost. A strong legal partner is not someone who always says yes. It is someone who knows when to say yes, when to say not like this, and when to say this is not worth the exposure. That is the real balance. The goal is not to become the no department, but the goal is also to not become a rubber stamp. The goal is to become credible, and credibility in this space comes from judgment. Judgment means understanding law, business, incentives, internal capacity, and negotiation dynamics at the same time. That is what makes someone valuable in commercial legal roles. Not just legal knowledge in the abstract, but legal judgment under pressure. So, if I had to summarize this entire video in one sentence, it will be this. A good contract review does not try to make the contract perfect. It tries to make the deal safe enough, clear enough, and smart enough for the business to move forward responsibly. That is how you protect the company without killing the deal.